Hello. So the international break finally ended with a serious bang this game week as goals galore, particularly in the 3 p.m.s, made the first weekend back well worth waiting for. Welcome back to FPL podcasting as well. It's going to be a long slog throughout the rest of this calendar year with so much action to come. But we are, as always, Who Got the Assist? I'm Tom. Find me on Twitter at WGTA_FPL. My co-host is Anthony at FPL Stag. The league code is 2IP43T. And we've got a guest this week. So regular listeners will know we at WGTA are well known for giving a platform to little known accounts, trying to find their way and build their audience. Last year we had some guy called Mark. It was a direction, Anthony, I'm sure. Northern, Eastern, I don't know,
Western, I think, actually, yeah.
something like that. And we've also had another Mark, FPL Brigadier or something. Anyway, he's done it right for himself too. Continuing in that vein, we're delighted to welcome debutant Andy, who I believe is on Twitter at Let's Talk _FPL. I think you've got a YouTube channel somewhere too, right? No, I'm kidding. Welcome, Andy, to our relatively amdram podcast compared to what you're used to these days. Probably the lowest tech video you've done in quite a while. Really great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll tell you now, if people saw how I do my videos, I think the production is not quite as good as it probably looks, to be honest. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. Long time. So you guys have been one of the first podcasts around, right? One of the first mainstream podcasts anyway. So yeah, good to be on.
Great to get you on, Andy. And it's been coming in the pipeline for quite some time, so good to have you here.
Sorry, just I can pronounce Doherty properly as well. So
which is a very, very important thing on this podcast, especially. So yeah, this pod anyway, what we're going to be doing is not looking, unfortunately, at Matt Doherty or any of the rest of the Republic of Ireland players who had such a great international break. Instead, what we're going to be trying to work out is what's going on with the strikers. We're going to be looking at the current situation, why there's been patchy returns across the board, and if we can find any solution. Hint, probably not. But what we're going to do, first of all, is start off with the Gameweek Reviews, which has been a bit all over the place for all of us. It's one of those weeks, I think, where the template continued to win out. But I think, Andy, we're going to come to you first.
Yeah, pretty much as you said. It was it's just another rubbish week, really. Like I can't complain too much, right? I'm still in the top 100k, which after 12 weeks is fine. Like, I'm not worried about it, but it's just 4 red arrows in 5 now. And it's just another week where I don't own Reece James, and therefore things didn't go too well. Like, overall, I've got Chilwell, I've got Trent, I've got Cancelo. I just don't have that fourth defender that a lot of other people have got.
Yeah.
And that is like, that's been the problem for the last few weeks, really. No Jota either. There's another player I wanted. Foden came off before 60th minute. Like, it was just all, apart from Jimenez, and obviously, you know, Salah's like whatever at the moment, isn't he, really? Yeah, it's just another just a bit of a meh week. Like, 69 is fine. It's just not as good as everyone else. It was another red arrow. So, yeah, just a bit rubbish in the moment.
Always a bit quite a satisfaction in getting a 69, though, isn't there?
Yeah, yes.
That's one I always wanted to stop on. I always keep getting 68s or 70s. But enough about my personal life. Anthony, how are you doing?
A little bit better. So 73 points this week. This was kind of one of those weeks where finally moving back towards the template, still fixing the calamitous wildcard in game week 3, where I sold Trent Alexander-Arnold. I finally got him back in. He came in for Connor Cody as part 2 of my free transfers. Okay, yes, I did miss out on the clean sheet with Cody, but in the overall scheme of things, I was happier to finally stop being punished again by Trent Alexander-Arnold. So at least I got his 15 points, because honestly, this would have been a calamitous game week had I not had those 15 points. I, a bit like Andy, don't have Reece James. I did have Rudiger, so at least I had Cancelo, Rudiger and Trent Alexander-Arnold. But I feel like at this point, a lot of managers had the benefit of 4 high-scoring defenders. My 4th defender was Livramento, who, you know, whilst I'm happy with his returns so far this season, I obviously would have loved to have had another decent return from a forward. I also brought in, with my free transfer, Guaita, Tom, just to join you. He came in for Robert Sanchez. Basically what happened was all my great talk about wanting to have a premium goalkeeper, etc., and I just didn't have the money in the end to do it. It's kind of a lie. I did have the money to do it, but I would have had to not get Trent this week, or I would have had to take a hit somewhere else. Wasn't doing that. I just used my 2 free transfers, and I was okay with that. So look, at least a 73 points was good enough to get me a bit of a green arrow, but I think that just belies how I've been doing so far this season, that it's got me up to 525k, which isn't much good. Just to run through the rest of my side, given I've done just the keeper and defence. I had Son, he got a 2-pointer. Saka came in off the bench. He got a 2-pointer. He came in for Rafinha, who obviously was ill. I had Salah captain like every man and their dog. And then up top, I ended up with Tony and Antonio because Gabriel Jesus did not play, which meant that Ben White came in off the bench for 0 points. Kind of unfortunate that it was Cody I sold, not White. I might have had, a few more points there but this is kind of one of those real minor gripes in the overall scheme of things. I'm still one defender off where I probably need to be, and I'm just finding that the calculated gamble that was Gabriel Jesus continues to not pay off. The calculated gamble that was Bukayo Saka continues to not pay off, and I'm still now, I think, even keener than ever to sell him. But I think he could have another stay of execution in my team, just because, not that I have fires, but I just feel like I'm still trying to catch up to this template, right, which I abandoned and got punished by. But anyway, let's move on from me, Tom. We'll move on to you.
Yeah, you abandoned ship from the template. I'm pretty damn template actually. So I ended up with a big 86 this week. Rubbish transfers, mind you, -1 net. So I sold Vardy, I sold Kai, and I sold Benrahma. They all blanked. Huge relief on all counts, especially after that first game, the Leicester-Chelsea game. I was on the way into London to meet a few guys then. But I was nervously checking my phone every time, and I was just expecting the Vardy goal, expecting Kai to do something. But hey-ho, I brought in Kane, I brought in Gundogan, and who else did I bring in? And I brought in Gallagher. Gallagher obviously got the assist. Kane blanked. And Gundogan, I kind of just last minute decided to bring him in, really. I considered Bernardo Silva, I considered Cornet, considered Trossard, Jota, but I hate Jota, has been discussed ad nauseam. He got very lucky with his goal, a massive Tavares assist. But the reasoning was there with Gundogan. He hit the bar with a looped header, had the ball in his hands, set penalty as well. That was otherwise overturned. Sliding doors. He's now the second highest XGI underperformer. Ouch. Anyway, in the actual team itself, Guaita, 6 saves. Good. The Jack rumbles on. James, Alexander-Arnold and Cancelo. Amazing stuff. 96 points over the last 3 weeks from the 3 of them. Midfield, pretty boring. Salah, Gundogan and Mbeumo hit the woodwork again. Amazing. And up front, Kane and Antonio blanks, but I had a striker off the bench, and that striker was Emmanuel Bloody Dennis. He was actually my second bench as well, just to rub in the jam even further. So obviously Rafinha didn't play, and Christensen didn't play, surprisingly. I was expecting him to play that game against Leicester, but Thiago Silva still life in his old legs yet. So Dennis came off my bench, second bench, for 14 points. Sheer dumb luck, basically working in my favour this week. But either way, I've recovered from the Kai disaster now and back to where I was before all that happened. Up from the depths of 800k to 230k in 4 weeks. But yeah, obviously not great. I've had to go for a salvage up, but a couple of decent weeks have really helped me. So yeah, a decent momentum going into Game Week 13. Whew. Review time. Very, very quickly, if we can, Anthony. What of the did anything kind of impact your objectives this week? And we'll have to see if Andy's got any as well, actually.
No, not so much. I got the timing right. I think that was the one thing that kind of I threatened to get wrong. I didn't make a late transfer, and I didn't make on Friday night or early on Saturday morning, like right up onto the deadline. Aside from that, really, I didn't really have any elite players to transfer out except for Salah himself, so that wasn't going to happen. Obviously, I captained Salah himself and just went with everyone else, really, which was pretty much what my objective was there. And I didn't take any hits, so I continued to navigate along.
Fair play. None of my objects really matter. Captaincy, obviously, I'm just going to follow that all year, I think. It's gotten too far now for me to break off from that. No 50-50 this week. I knew I was going to take. It was a 50-50 between what player I was going to hit for. And obviously, that kind of didn't go right. But, as I said, sliding doors. Taking a chance on form, well, all right, maybe I could have, said, right, I'd go with Cornet and get yet another one-shot, one-goal performance under my belt. But I went for kind of, the ultra differential sort of thing, which we'll question on later on. So maybe I should have thought about that a little bit more. Andy, obviously you've been playing for many years, broadcasting for many years. if you could kind of crystallize how you set up and how you think about things at the start of each season, do you have any rules, objectives that you hold on to?
Yeah, I think captaincy. Obviously, right now everyone's on Salah captain. Anyway, I'm never that bothered about having to go against the grain with captaincy. I think this week I might have to break an unofficial rule, which is potentially taking a hit for a defender because Reece James is it's just doing my head in at the moment. Like just assists or goals coming from everywhere. And then even if he doesn't get them, there's clean sheets aplenty for Chelsea as well. So that's something I wouldn't, it's not like I have a rule that I can never do it, but it's not something I ever want to do. So I'd be interested to see what I decide by the end of the week. But yeah, I think just standard captaincy, expected data I use a lot these days. And fixtures are king as always. Always.
Perfect. It sounds like the way I've gone actually. It's just all the expected data these days. I very rarely talk. Oh yeah, I very rarely talk about like shots on target and stuff like that. I call them the analog stats and leave it at that. But yeah, it's all about expected for me nowadays. So you'll find out in a little bit. All right. Mini league update very swiftly. Few movers and shakers this week. New top man is Daniel Mind, Steadfast FC. He's up from 16th into first, a big 97 pointer this week. That pushes Graham Murray down from first to second at 73 this week. Not enough to see him hold on to top spot. In third is Richard Carswell with 82, stays where he was. Joint fourth, Tom Glover and Robert Bob. Robert Bob's been around for quite a while, but both he and Tom go up from 7th and 8th respectively. In joint sixth, there's 3 people in joint sixth. It's Christian Mitanovsky, Robert Paul and Mohamed Arafa. Christian comes up from 18th and Robert Paul comes up from 26th with mid-80s scores. Unfortunately, Mohamed, he was second before. Now he's back to that kind of sixth role, but still around the top 10. Fair play. In ninth, it's Dan Byrom, 88 points this week, up from 29th. And in joint 10th, Sean McGarry, all the way up from 19th to 10th. Been in the top 10 a few times actually this season. I recognise the name. And Sean Dunlop, down from 3rd to 10th, just 70 this week. Not enough to see him keep where he was, but yeah, really good performances there, especially that massive 97 for Daniel to take him top of the mid-league. Right, and the final bit of this little kind of catch-up section is the market forces. So last week, Anthony, Nick noted that Antonio was shockingly in the top 5 for transfers in. What's happening now?
Funnily enough, Tom, you've led that one in quite easily because, Antonio is actually the most sold player in the game this week. I guess we'll move for transfers in first of all, though a bit more logical. So we'll start with this. Trent Alexander-Arnold is the most transferred in. So people who were a bit like me, who just needed to fix that big, huge hole in their side, have managed to get him in. So he's now 7.8 million, 232,000 transfers in or so. He's swiftly followed really by Reece James. So a lot of people like myself and Andy who still haven't managed to get him in yet are trying to get him into their sides. And Conor Gallagher is the 3rd most transferred in player this game week. Kind of after that, it's a very humdrum list of the likes of Cancelo, who again, I guess just another fullback getting in on this act, Smith Rowe and Raul Jimenez. As for transfers out, you're looking at the most transferred out, as we said, being Mikel Antonio. He's followed by his teammate Benrahma. Cristiano Ronaldo is the 3rd most transferred out player, followed by Man City's Diaz. And then after that, it is a real smattering of players. Jamie Vardy, kind of the most sold of the bunch. But what you're really seeing is just, poor form starting to just be rewarded with sales, and that's especially, I guess, focused in those 2 West Ham players who were so highly owned earlier in the season, and they continue to be highly sold at this moment.
Cool, nice and easy this week. All right, let's take a break there and move on to the key topic just after this. So we're back and it's on to the main topic this week. So there's been loads of questions in the community, all about one key topic, the forwards. For example, FPL Fairy Steve just asked simply if we go 4-5-1 because strikers are so bad. FPL Snake, so check yourself. These guys are asking about esoteric characters like Benteke, Watkins, and Ings are coming into FPL managers' minds, and even the likes of FPL Juninho, James Carroll, and James Morrison. They're asking about people like Josh King, Emmanuel Dennis. Like, wow, it's simply such a tough spot at the moment. So kind of our main question is simply, what's going on with the forwards? Let's start with some analysis. Is it a FPL wasteland, the forwards? So the current state of play is that I did a bit of data work to find this out, basically looking to see if the forwards are, in fact, in a full-blown crisis. I initially looked at counting up the points for all positions and dividing them by the number of players to get a working average. The problem is there's far more defenders and midfielders than there are forwards. So it pushed up the number for forwards as an average as a data effect. So if anyone does that analysis and tells you forwards doing okay, it's rubbish. Tell them to hand in their analysis badge straight away. Instead, what I did was I made a cutoff at the top 30, mainly informed by the fact that only 30 goalkeepers have scored more than 0 points this season, and found this. So in terms of ranking of points scored on average by position, bottom to top, the top 30 goalkeepers have scored 859 points, meaning there's your average goalkeeper in the top 30 has scored 28.6 points thus far. Forwards are in third, 1,159 points scored by the top 30 forwards in total. Your average forward in that category has scored 39 points, 38.6. Your defenders are in second, 1,471 points scored by the top 30. Your average top 30 defender has scored 49 points. And midfielders are top, so 1,589 points scored. Your average top 30 midfielder has scored 53 points. So your average top 30 midfielder is outscoring your average top 30 forward by 13 points, and your defender is outscoring your forward by 10 points. Maybe we'd expect that, though. No, mids and forwards, as we know, have had a better season, and there are more routes to points. So what I did a little bit more to add a little bit more colour here was to look further back in time as well, add some time frame over this, just to see kind of if the forwards actually have a lingering crisis. So I looked over the last 4 years for forwards, same methodology with the top 30 at the Game Week 12 interval. The outcome is pretty stark, and it seems to suggest, yes, there's a huge crisis in the forwards. Points scored by Game Week 12 have been in serious decline over the last 4 years in the forward position. This year, the top forwards have scored 147 fewer points at this point last season. At this time last year, for example, 5 players, Kane, Vardy, DCL, Bamford and Wilson, were above the points total for this year's highest scoring forward right now. Here's Antonio. Kane has scored 107 points by this point. 2019-20, similar tale. The top 30 scored 83 more points than the year I just mentioned, and a whopping 224 more points than this season. So a real come down. And 2018-19, obviously they'll stretch back a bit far, but that's the last time we saw a year-on-year improvement, as they actually scored more points. More points were actually scored in 2019-20 than 2018-19. Here's the thing, though. Even that year, the total was higher than the current season, so 111 points more, in fact. So basically, we've all thought it for a while, but it seems to me that the forward position, based on this data, is certainly in decline at this point in time, and might well be described as being in a bit of a crisis, especially with the likes of Kane being like he is, as we'll discuss later, and the likes of DCL and Bamford being absent, which leave huge holes in the roster. Headline: forwards are in crisis, and the data supports that. Right, lots to pick through to begin with before we even start thinking about players. What do you guys think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, right now, forwards are just not looking great at all. I think, as cliche as it sounds, things do often change quite quickly in FPL, right? So it was only 5 weeks ago, no one was even really talking about Reece James. 5 weeks later, he's like the most essential player in FPL. 3 weeks into the season, I was figuring out how the hell to get Calvert-Lewin into my team. He's obviously not been an option. So I think the fact that we're missing players like Calvert-Lewin, Wilson's not been an option for a while, Bamford's been injured for forever. That's obviously hurting the position. Obviously, Tony there was a lot of hype around him. He hasn't really delivered what a lot of people were expecting, myself included. And obviously, because it's been, once Lukaku got injured, we all went to Kane and Vardy, and they've not done anything either. So the forward right now, I'll be honest, the first time I think ever I've been playing FPL that I would genuinely go 4-5-1. I've never ever gone anywhere near it before. If I could get to it quickly right now, I think I would. I just think it's just the way it is. Like we said earlier on, it's so difficult to look past those 4 defenders. I don't even need to say who they are. We all know who they are. And then you've got the midfield spots as well. Forward's just not looking good, but it could change quickly. I don't even think Ronaldo in 4 weeks is going to be an option for me. I don't think I'm going to go there. I just don't think there's any value there in a season where Salah is just captain. So I think forwards are, as you show with the data, not looking great. And it's hard to sit here and argue for it. It's hard to even play devil's advocate, if I'm completely honest. It just doesn't look good at all.
You tried to play devil's advocate, I'd have been really raising my eyebrow, definitely. It's really, the data Tom presents really does back up everything that we would have thought up to now. I do think, though, Andy, you're so right to say that things could change quite quickly. Like I think we could totally have a Michael's at the wheel moment with Ronaldo getting, a brace and a hat-trick type scenario, and then we just think, oh, he's essential, rip up your teams, this sort of moment. And then, we'll be just all looking at Cristiano. The same could happen, to be honest, with even Lukaku. If he just starts to find any semblance of form, we knew he was getting the chances, just wasn't necessarily putting the finishes with them. That could see us change our mind. And I think ditto for Kane, who obviously has such a proven record in the league. I think, picking out a few stats that maybe Tom was, or maybe looking more specifically at some stats that look into where Tom was looking at. Like, there's only one forward in the top 10 highest scorers in the last 6 game weeks, and that's Raul Jimenez. And like, I know I've picked a random number of weeks there just to give an indication, but Jimenez is only in that really because his only double figure haul of the whole entire season is in that patchwork. And that's the Newcastle game where he got 2 assists 6 weeks ago. In the last 5 weeks, no forward is in the top 10 scorers. Same if you look at expected points, for example, only Aubameyang actually is up there. Another model has King and Benteke sneaking into the top 10. But, basically you're kind of talking about forwards being very much peripheral in those particular data points as well. And across the season, it's not much different. Just Tony and Antonio were up there. And we know that Antonio, I guess, has statistically really tailed off in the last 5-6 game weeks. Tony had a good early few game weeks to kind of up his expected points, but as we say, that he hasn't necessarily got the returns that we expected. And so what we have seen is a serious decrease in the number of shots in the box as well, for example, that forwards have taken. Like last season up to game week 12, 200 this season up to game week 12, forwards have had the top 10 forwards have had 227 shots in the box. Last season, up to game week 12, the top 10 forwards had 265 shots in the box. So the 40-odd difference there is really, really significant in terms of just the amount of goals you'd expect players to have scored, etc. And that kind of is just a more specific stat that kind of gets at the points data that Tom was showing us.
Yeah, I just quickly on the premiums in particular. I think the only thing that can save the premium forwards right now is the Afcon Cup of Nations. I really do, because I've even when Ronaldo's fixtures get good, right? We all know when it's coming. It's been talked about a lot. Game week 15, no one's going for him because everyone's gone. Obviously I use everyone, like not literally everyone, but a lot of people have gone for Spurs as kind of the interim player before they get Ronaldo. Right, a lot of people got Kane for that reason, but so no one's getting him in game week 15 for Palace because Spurs have got Norwich. So it's game week 16, but in that week where he's got Norwich away, Salah's got Villa at home, so everyone's going to captain Salah anyway. In game week 17, Ronaldo's got Brentford away, Salah's got Newcastle at home. So the value for Ronaldo to be 12.4 million to not really be the best captain option, possibly not having penalties either. It's just no value there. And I'm just not sure Michael Carrick is the man that's going to turn it around, even, to be honest. Like, he even came out in a press conference and said that he's got very similar beliefs to Solskjaer. I've got little confidence that much is going to change for Man United. Obviously, we can see over the next few weeks to kind of see what happens before that fixture swing. But I just don't see it. Like, my plan with Kane right now is to downgrade him when the fixtures turn rather than go to Ronaldo. And again, I obviously hold the right to change my mind, but I just don't see any value in these people. Even Lukaku at 11.5 minutes, he's not got penalties, and again, probably not going to captain him. So the value, when you get to that kind of price, the value of those players is that you're going to captain them. And until Salah leaves the country, I just don't really see that happening all that often, to be honest. So yeah, premiums are just, they've got something big is going to have to happen the next few weeks, I think, for people's mind to change on premiums. Don't know what you think. Yeah,
for what it's worth, I totally agree with you on the Ronaldo thing, that it would take something really spectacular. And I guess that's why I kind of say Michael's at the wheel, because it was that sort of spectacular turnaround when Ole took over that might see someone like Ronaldo come into vogue. But as you say, that would take a very unexpected shift, given that it does seem like this is a real continuation of everything that we've heard was going on at Manchester United, just without the same guy on the touchline. So, for example, all his staff have been kept on. Basically, they've just everyone's just been promoted one tier effectively, and it's just like, congratulations, here's our new management team, and there's no real change. It's the same people putting out the cones, it's the same people writing platitudes on the whiteboard that we've all been hearing about the last few days. So it's hard to expect a massive difference. They're not walking in and having all the ketchup taken away. Like, things aren't changing big time at Carrington in the next few weeks, and I just kind of feel, with that in mind, as you say, Andy, it's hard to expect a big turnaround for United. And I think we're kind of lucky, actually, that we have a little bit of a lead in to that good run of fixtures before we make any decisions. But as you say, I think Bruno could easily be the one that we look to if United did start to turn to form, just because of positioning as much as anything.
Yeah, I think we've got questioning nice in a bit, but I think
Yeah, sorry.
pretty much covered it anyway. But yeah, Bruno would probably be where I'd be going. I mean, in terms of the premium forwards in general, you're right that it's probably a good idea to be downgrading and spreading that money elsewhere. But the only kind of rejoinder I've got is, well, where to? Because if we don't have a kind of a dual premium setup anymore, then you've got loads of money kind of sloshing around. It'll be a case of kind of why not with these sort of players, which is probably not a good reason to be endorsing a player if you're basically saying why not. They're possibly a differential. Like Chelsea have got decent fixtures actually. Throughout the end of this calendar year too. They don't have a good FDR colour, but they are decent fixtures for a team like Chelsea. And as you say, the Man United fixtures are great. But are we going to be really seeing this happen? Are we going to see, for example, people be as happy to jump off Kane if Spurs do pretty well against Brentford and Norwich? Like as I said last week, I think that if Lukaku hadn't have gotten injured, this would not be as much of a thing, because I can't see a world in which he wouldn't have reaped against that Norwich team, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
so we would have kept him until probably this week, and then we'd have sold him for Kane, I suspect, and all be kind of upset. But we'd still have that sort of duomium sort of thing. But I think him being sold, things all moving around, meant that forwards became even more like a bit of a sore thumb in how we're thinking about things. Not particularly helped as well by a few of the misfiring sort of popular picks as well. So Vardy, Antonio, and Tony, you could probably add more, have occupied slots in our teams at various times with varying success. And it's been 3 weeks without a return for Vardy and Antonio. Tony was very, very lucky to score this week. It was a Darlow mishap completely. Maybe it's a case of horses for courses, but the last 6 game weeks, for example, Antonio's 8th for forward XGI, Tony's 19th, and Vardy's 21st. Pretty dire situation, and I think it's probably worth just diverting very quickly onto questions, for example, from FPL Fledgling. On selling Antonio, because I think a lot of people are kind of looking to do so. I'm not sure you probably would be selling, if you've held Vardy, for example, at this point, I don't think you'd be doing that, because Watford, Southampton, Aston Villa and Newcastle are the next 4. If you haven't been tempted by Spurs already, a Kane buy, for example, you probably aren't going there now. But if you're looking at Antonio, or if you're looking at Tony in your team and thinking, oh, I could move them on, I've probably got some sympathy with you. I mean, Andy, what do you reckon to that? I mean, I'm probably going to be keeping Antonio myself. Do you have it? I can't remember if you have him actually, but
yeah, I've got him, yeah.
What are you going to do about him? Leave him there like me?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're discussing now is like circumstantial. Like just really quickly again on the premiums, like it's all well and good for me to say spread the cash around. There's probably a lot of people that got on all the current template players right at the start that can afford to have them plus the premium. They might just keep that spot. And the same thing with Antonio. I think it's just circumstantial now, or like situational, that if you haven't sold him, I don't know if now is the right time to do it. It feels like it is, because obviously he's blanked so many times and, the data's not great. But I guess part of that is due to the fixtures, which probably tells us maybe we should have sold him a bit earlier. And Man City away, Chelsea at home is horrible next 3. But if you've got a decent squad where you can bench him, I think it's possibly worth holding on. The only thing I would say is I thought this a while back, if you have sold him or you're thinking of selling him, I think game week 16 was always touted as the buyback time, but Burnley away, Arsenal away, I don't know if that's like essential to have him back. So if you do get rid of him, I think you could wait until game week 18, and then you're coming up to a busy Christmas period where is he going to play all those games? I mean, I know West Ham don't really have another option, but he has been managed a bit throughout Europe so far this season. So I know you can use the rotation thing for literally every player over Christmas, but I don't know. Antonio just seems like one of those that could, but then it is Norwich, Southampton, Watford, and Leeds, and 4 out of 5 fixtures. So you probably don't want to go without. So I think it obviously depends on squad setup. I'm probably keeping him, and I'm probably going to have to play him for Man City and Chelsea, which I don't really like. There's just other stuff I want to do, and I don't know if getting rid of Antonio is the priority in my team. So I'm probably keeping him. But yeah, I think I've said this for a few weeks now. If you don't sell him this week, I really think you've missed the boat. Yeah, because it's Brighton, Chelsea, Burnley, Arsenal. It's not the worst set of fixtures for West Ham and Antonio, really. I think a few weeks ago was probably the time to sell him. Now is the last time. If you don't do it this week, you've got to hold, I think.
we used to just call him the ex-goat, didn't we? And it's
Yeah.
totally true. Like all we would say was, if only he could stay fit. Like last season, he was sixth for XGI per 90 among strikers, pretty much level with the likes of Kane. At the moment, he is fit. I mean, 7.5 at the start of the season was great value. He's the biggest XGI underperformer amongst forwards. I can see the case to sell him, but I guess part of me would be thinking it's a transfer I'd kind of be wanting to make again. So I'm saving myself the transfer in December. I'm probably going to be playing him against Man City. Probably going to be playing him against Chelsea. Obviously, West Ham have been playing okay, the Wolves game notwithstanding. He's just not been at the sharp end like we'd like him to be. But he's one of those players, like perhaps Callum Wilson is, where you could look down the entire fixture list and not be surprised if you woke up tomorrow and all the games have been played that he'd have scored a goal in any of those sorts of games, because he has those sort of numbers and that sort of play style. And West Ham are still playing well. They've been checked a little bit in their momentum, but they're still good. Anthony, what do you reckon here?
This is the thing with Antonio. Like, he has definitely dropped off in the last few weeks, even though West Ham, with a bit of a mishap at the weekend. But generally, West Ham haven't really dropped off. And even though the fixtures were tougher for them, they still got in amongst the goals and things. But Antonio only got one goal contribution, for example, in West Ham's last 9 goals. He's had 2 shots on target out of 13. Shots that he's had in the last 6 game weeks. These are kind of, fairly erratic numbers. And whilst his chances created numbers remain quite good, top for chances created in the forwards, but third in terms of XA in the last few weeks, there is starting to become a case for selling him, for absolutely sure. But the problem is, to whom? And this is something that we're going to get to, of course, and that's why we're going through this whole entire section. But there is no clear alternative. And so I think with that in mind, there is that thing that you were saying, Tom, of just like, oh, well, it's like you'd expect them to score against anyone and you wouldn't rule them out against anyone. And that's really a massive plus for any player in FPL, especially a forward in a season where forwards aren't doing particularly well. But then there is the team value aspect to this as well. Like, an awful lot of people, I think, would have got him at the 7.5 or 7.6. So you've probably got about 0.3 to lose if you do this sale. You're definitely probably going to have to take a haircut, even if you wait until the Norwich game to get him back in. It's going to cost you a little bit. That's definitely something that needs to be kept in mind, because I think even though we don't necessarily have as many premiums in our side, we're still spreading out the cash, and people need the 102, 103, 104 to fill out their teams at the moment. And so that's definitely a factor. And then I think, though, the primary thing that makes me say don't sell Antonio is that A, you probably have another forward you want to sell, and B, who are you going to buy in for him anyway? At least he's the likely man.
But sorry, just before we go on to the next thing there, let's stick to Antonio, because I'm sure some other people are thinking the same thing that I am this week. So you're right, there's not many other forwards I'd want to go to, but here's a couple of scenarios that I think I'm looking at that maybe others are. So is Antonio down to Josh King to fund a move for Reece James, or Antonio down to a dead spot like Locadia or Davis from Villa, and then getting Jota in? So you're not necessarily going to another forward, you're switching that money to a different position. I'm thinking about doing it for a hit. And even when I say that out loud, that just sounds crazy, absolutely crazy. But that's just the kind of situation I'm in right now, where these players are just like Jota. I think if he's nailed, I know you don't like him, Tom, but he's just so good. And obviously Reece James is just killing me. And the fixtures aren't great for West Ham. And I think if we go down that route where we don't have Kane, and maybe even Lukaku's saves $1 million, there is probably a way to get Antonio back. So I'm considering getting rid of him. I don't know if I will. But what do you think of that? Josh King to fund the move. I'm basically buying an enabler to buy Reece James.
We may come on to Josh King very shortly, so let's park that one for the moment. I just think before we do come on to potential solutions to our problems, are there any other impacts we should discuss? I just wanted to put forward a couple of different things here. One is that there are a couple of players intruding on the forward spots, which we see every year, but this year Cornet and Trossard, for example, are taking up a few kind of areas. Bamford and DCL, as we've noted earlier on, are huge absentees in the mid-price. Did you know, for example, that DCL is still third for XGI over the last 6 matches played, but he hasn't played since game week 3. So of all forwards, that the last 6 matches they've all played, he's still third. Ridiculous. And the last 4 game weeks, finally, the top 5 forwards points-wise are Emmanuel Dennis, King with 25, Jimenez 24, Pukki 21, and Tekkers and Armstrong equal 20. How did it come to this? It is so flipping bad. And I completely understand where you're coming from in that, in what you're saying, Andy, in terms of just saying, you know what, going to sack the forwards off completely, because for years we've been saying there's zero value in it, but this year I think the chickens really are, or whatever the birds, whatever the flying animals are coming home to roost, aren't they? Any other sort of things to pick up on what that could be driving the forwards being so rubbish?
I do personally. I do think it's just very situational. There's just a lot of the key players which we looked at the start of the season, the Bamfords, the Calvert-Lewins, they've just not been there. And I just can't really put my finger on it. Other than that, it's just I think the way the pricing is, obviously all those players like that did really well last year. They went up in price, so I think there is value in that mid-price forward spot. It's just not there right now. Like there can be value in Tony, Antonio, etc. It's just not there right this minute. And like I said, that can change, but it's hard to anyone that wants to bring in like Pookie or Josh King or anyone like that who we're going to talk about in a set. I don't really see a good reason to go against it. I can't. Yeah, I've thought about it a lot. These forwards, it's just not happening right now, and the defenders are just doing so well. They're just crazy good value. So why wouldn't you go there? You know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, who offers solutions? Is there a way that we can be saved from the forwards? I've had a look at FBref Stats Bomb to look at the Premier League strikers this season. The top two for XGI are, unsurprisingly, Antonio and Jamie Vardy. I was going to ask earlier on, who do you reckon is third, lads? And you both have given me stupid answers, and I've gone, haha, it's Josh King. Well, it's Josh King. Amazingly, yes. Josh King is third for expected goal involvement according to Stats Bomb for strikers this season, according to FBref, FPL-wise in terms of that, which is absolutely crazy. He's 0.1 XGI off Jamie Vardy. Hindi Monkey's going to be loving it, isn't he? And this also answers James Morrison's question earlier. But he did get moved to the wing versus United with Dennis down the middle. A massive overperformance, by the way, by Dennis thus far. 4.52 more goals than he should have scored according to his XG. It's unbelievable. Only Salah's ahead of him. A couple of other people worth mentioning. Oh, in fact, the whole list is, for those listening, Antonio's top, then Vardy, King. Antonio's top by quite a long way, I should mention. CR7 in fourth, Firmino in fifth, Chris Wood in sixth, Benteke in seventh, Jesus in eighth, Watkins in ninth, and Lukaku still holding on, ranking that by non-pen XGI. So, I mean, yeah, Josh King dominating the XGI over the last 6 weeks against among strikers. Benteke, it's enough to throw your hands in the air, isn't it? I mean, what do you guys see as a solution to the forward crisis? I mean, Andy, it sounds like you're just kind of thinking, you know what, I'm just going to leave it for the time being. Does this sway you, this kind of data here, to think about, you know what, Josh King could be the answer to my problems? Because it sounds to me like you want Reece James, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think obviously, as always, you have to probably temper our expectations. I'm not sure Josh King can keep those numbers up, but his baseline numbers for, you know, when he was at Bournemouth and obviously at Everton, although he didn't play huge amount, they're not that bad for someone that's priced 5.6 million. And I think a lot of people are hoping, myself included, that Sarr's missed penalties means there's a penalty taker switch. And I know penalties have been down this year, but it could go to Josh King potentially. And also, he just has good fixtures over Christmas. So if there is going to be rotation, then he could possibly come in. I think from game week 16, his fixtures are quite good. The next three are pretty awful. But after that, it's quite good. I think a lot of the players on here, sometimes there's just a better player in a different position. Like Jesus, for example, if he played every week, be great. You've got Cancelo is probably a better option, maybe Foden as well. Watkins, I think, could be interesting over Christmas because Gerard's obviously in there now. Let's see how they do over the next few. But I can't believe it. I think Josh King is going to be the solution for me eventually. Whether it's this week or not, I think he's going to come in. Like with Antonio, obviously top of the list. Is Europe catching up with him a little bit? I don't know. Maybe that's just building a narrative.
Jamaica as well.
Yeah, maybe I'm just building a narrative in my head, but he is playing more minutes this year, I assume, than he was last year. Obviously, he's been fit, which has been great. Like he's not. I think the only game he missed was the one he got suspended for. So that's great, and they have managed him a bit, but he has played extra games. I know FPL Irons was saying that he thought he looked leggy, but I also think he's one of those players that does look. It's a bit like Harry Kane. I think they always look a bit leggy, but then just not. So, yeah, I think on this list, like Josh King is going to be the answer, and Watkins possibly in a few weeks because when Villa's fixtures get better, that's what I'm looking at.
Oh, Woodwork Watkins. I mean, to be honest, if I didn't have Conor Gallagher, I'd really be looking at Benteke as well. Like he, since last season, has been on quite the growth curve, and I think that may have something to do with the fact that Edouard has signed a few Palace players. Say that the new contracts when he was playing for that, and now having his position slightly under threat, seems to have really kind of seen Benteke step up a gear. Looking at kind of Benteke when he was at Villa, when he was actually most of our size, I think, at one point. He was very, very good for a little while, wasn't he? A proper talisman back then. But I'm still getting over the fact that we've got a podcast here where we're all basically saying, well, Anthony's about to come in and steamroller us, but you and I are both saying, Josh King, he looks good, doesn't he? Wow, what's happened to us? Anthony, talk some sense.
No, I can't find any icy glass of water to throw on your faces for this one. It's really hard to build any sort of argument against you. The one thing with Benteke, I guess, and just to add to it, is that I think the Villa project, or the Palace project, is coming together more and more for Vieira week by week, it seems, and Benteke seems to be really growing into that and becoming a more and more vital cog in that particular wheel. And so whilst Conor Gallagher is doing well, I wouldn't discount Benteke, especially given the paucity or the lack of options in the forwards. I wouldn't necessarily discount him just because you've got Conor Gallagher in your side. But yeah, it's very tough looking at the forwards to newly use a Nickism. It's really hard to pick any of them out. I do think that Gabriel Jesus has been extraordinarily unlucky not to do better than he has. He's pretty consistently playing, so I don't think minutes are as big of a problem with him as they may be for pretty much every other City midfielder or forward that you might be able to pick from. But he's not a solution to the problem because he's more expensive. And so with that in mind, I think, Andy, I'd be very tempted to do the same thing as you and look to King and to move money into defence. I'm just not sure if I want to commit to going into that structure, because I guess a lesson that we've learned in previous seasons is that is just not a winning structure over the long term. And I know that fullbacks are doing better en masse than we've ever seen them do before. But
the only thing
go on.
Yeah, sorry, because I'm thinking the same, or thinking along the same lines. The only thing I can think of, and again, is it just finding an excuse not to do it? Is again, we are coming to Christmas. Surely Azpilicueta is not going to keep missing games, and at some point he could play wing back. I've got Chilwell. Surely Alonso is going to get some games soon. So that's the only thing I can think of. But again, every player is susceptible to rotation over Christmas. So I don't know if that is a good excuse not to do it. But you're right. Once you go into that structure, then obviously you've got to use the same amount of transfers to kind of get back out of it, I suppose, is the only issue.
Yeah, and especially when you've got Tuchel there at Chelsea, who really isn't afraid to rotate. And I think I can say everyone's been surprised by how consistently the likes of Reece James and Chilwell have been playing in recent weeks. I don't think when they got into the team originally, they weren't kind of heralded as nailed picks, and they were good punts that have just worked out for managers who were in on them super duper early. But at this point now, I think we kind of just have to ignore the minutes question and get in on them if you're like you and me, Andy, who are just like suffering without them. So yeah, it does prove a tough question. I think Rudiger +1 is the way to go personally. I don't really like the James plus Chilwell approach. I feel like that's a little bit too much risk. I like the expected minutes of Rudiger, because quite frankly, I don't want to end up with 10 men because I just didn't have enough defenders playing in a given week. And that's just kind of becomes a risk because, as you say, quite a lot of them are prone to rotation in some way, shape or form.
I guess to put it back to the forwards, it kind of feels like the forwards are now basically a piggy bank for financing moves into other positions. I mean, just to kind of summarize what's going on with the forwards, it sounds like, well, the data kind of shows they are in crisis at the moment, and we're following our nose on the value. So notionally a 4-4-2, 3-5-2, 4-5-1 seems to be the way the current state of affairs is. I had absolutely no notion at the start of this season I'd be recording a podcast, as I said earlier, where Josh King would emerge as a bit of a hero. But I think, as Andy said at the start as well, things do change very quickly in FPL. We're not going to declare the forward dead straight away. Even though there are kind of bugger all options at the moment, all it would take would be a Wilson, a couple of goals, the likes of Danny Ings, likes of Bamford, as mentioned earlier, Watkins, starting to take off, and they're at such a nice price, as a lot of the mid-price mids have been, that it's not that difficult to shift from kind of a midfielder to a second forward or something like that. We all need to have one forward. I don't know what forward it would be at the moment. That's how dire the situation has become. Would you just have Antonio? Would you have Kane? I mean, I've got both of those two, and obviously I'm not happy with either of them, but I've just got other things to do along the same lines as these guys. I'm also going to be stuck with a premium forward for the next 3 in Kane, so the door is open for me to potentially look at Lukaku or potentially look at Ronaldo. So I do think there will be a lot of kind of FOMO generated, and as you said, things will change so quickly, and a couple of good results for United, and suddenly we're all kind of on the Ron train all over again. I think that they are in crisis. It's a very dire situation at the moment, but we have to be aware that things will change. It's just the data is not very nice reading if you are a striker fan. What would you guys summarise the situation as?
What is a striker fan? That's my favorite one. my summary is, if you're a striker fan, like you've gone into the niche of FPL beyond the niche.
You know how people always savagely play 3-4-3. It's everywhere, isn't it? Like, it's the most played formation out there. Like, people are like, I need to have 3 strikers no matter what. For years people didn't look at having 2 strikers and bumping a 3-5-2 or a 4-4-2. I think every season the person who has won, I think has been a guy, has played 3-4-3 every year. That's just the reality. But coming out of that mindset, as we've been trying to talk about for the last few years in terms of big at the back, is probably something that we are going to see more and more if things continue along this path.
But this is it, as we've talked about in previous years, big at the back, and then we've laughed 6-8 weeks later at that, and it's just is this finally the year that it really, really sticks? I think that's kind of the question that I ask myself as I, like Andy, ponder a switch in formation away from what has been accidentally a slavish devotion to 3-4-3 or a 3-5-2 up to now. Even though I have in the past played some sort of Christmas tree formation with 5 at the back and just not had it work out. What's going on with the forwards? I feel like it will turn around when we start to see some of the players that we've talked about who've been absent getting back into things. And at the end of the day, some of the big names who haven't been firing thus far, I think will start to fire again, because not just because they always have, but because they do have the raw ability, and they will just start to even just get penalties and stuff to supplement them along, and things will turn for them. But for now, I feel like we've kind of just got to make hay while the sun shines and probably move away from the forwards in some way, certainly.
Yeah, I don't really have too much. I think I would like to give a shout out to Raul Jimenez, who I bought in for Southampton, and since then he's gone massively under the radar. He's had 6 returns and 7 starts, actually, something like that. Obviously, he missed the Villa game, so he's done well. He's got 2 good fixtures coming up. He could be a swap for some people for Antonio. All it would have taken was for Kane to score 1 goal and get a few bonus points yesterday, and maybe the conversation would be a little bit different around the premium spot. But I think it doesn't take too much to change people's opinions. A few goals over the hard fixtures for Antonio. Suddenly we see a good fixture run. He's got to come back. Tony gets a goal next week. Well, he's got Leeds and Watford soon. The narrative kind of changes quickly. So yeah, it's hard to argue against going cheap right now. But I suspect it won't be too long until we go back again.
Harry Kane, XG of 0.54. Actually did a shot on target.
Yeah, amazing.
I know.
Progress.
You don't get any points for those, though, sadly. Good points, lads. Good points. Basically, the forwards are dead for now, but you could probably see a forward hand coming through the earth. A zombie reanimate itself and become of interest again. No shot on Jimenez as well. Right, let's take a break there. Move on to the correspondence and questions just after this. Hello, so we're back. We're on to the correspondence and listeners' questions. So last week I got a few complaints that I sounded a bit droll during the correspondence. I didn't bring that sort of bouncing sort of sense of effervescence that Anthony does when introducing his very favourite section. So I'm going to get out of the way and let Anthony do his thing here. Over to you.
I'll present it like you, Tom. No. The correspondence section, yes, this is what this is now. The chance for you to get your long-form thoughts, questions, addendums to previous pods, poetry, whatever it may be, into to us, usually to whogottheassist@gmail.com, or you can try to get a DM through to Tom or even me if I check it occasionally, and via WhatsApp and Slack and whatever else you can find us there if you have us on those. It's Tom Campbell who emailed in this time to whogottheassist@gmail.com though, and he said this: "Hi both, I have a topic I'd love to get your views on. It's fairly overarching and broad, and is essentially, how much onus do you each personally attach to a team's collective defensive resoluteness when picking your defenders in FPL? Not to answer my own question, but I've always weighted this strongly based on me viewing clean sheets as a team metric, but I wonder what others' thoughts are. Is it a majority of your thinking versus the perceived individual likelihood of attacking returns? Or does that side of the argument win? And if so, why? Cheers, y'all. Come on, you Gunners in green." So what Tom basically is asking us is, when we're looking at defenders, are we looking at the team underlying stats there for, I guess, clean sheet points, or are we looking to the individual themselves? And I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on that, Andy.
Yeah, I think the answer is both. I think you look for the defense first, and then you pick your defender from that defense, mostly anyway. And I think then you decide whether it's worth paying the premium. So you go to Liverpool, they're all, obviously everyone's going to get the same amount of clean sheet points, right? We all know that. Is it worth paying like the million extra? It's more now, but at the start of the season, like $1 million extra for Trent versus Van Dijk? Yes, absolutely it is. But sometimes, like if you just want to get a cheap defender on the bench, then you'll often just pay for the cheapest one to get the clean sheet points. It all depends on the team, really. Obviously, for Chelsea, right? Like again, like just the four defenders, right? You're paying because they play for the top three defenses in the league, and they're also the most attacking players from those teams, and it's worth spending that extra. I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, so Brighton, for example, right now, Lamptey would be the go-to, I think, because he's the cheapest entry point and he's the most attacking as well. Then you'd have to just weigh up whether or not you want to take that risk of his hamstrings, right? We're coming up to, again, a busy period. He's been out for a long time. He's only just back up to scratch. Is he going to play? In that case, you might spend a bit more for nailed onness. But yeah, ultimately, I think both. I think team stats obviously definitely matter, but then you have to decide who's the best from there. Usually the attacking one.
Yeah, I agree. I think you have to categorize players by kind of playability on your FPL team. Obviously, wing-back supremacy, every player that you mentioned as being exciting is always going to be a wing-back. You don't really get too many attacking centre-backs, apart from Rudiger. If you look at that guy's heat map,
yeah,
go and have a look. It's absolutely it's something else. But for me, echoing what Andy said about kind of the wing-backs, a 4.5 million centre-back is always the perfect bench fodder as far as I'm concerned. Barring a Livramento, Lundstram or AWB being around, someone who will play 38 times 90 in that congested period, he's there for you. For me, that's Connor Cody. But on the pitch, I tend to focus on the wingies as per the big at the back strategy, and those wingies tend to be sat at the big clubs anyway. So you get your clean sheets, and they're kind of a byproduct of the upside that you expect to see. So it's all about categorization for me. I guess I see non-attacking defenders like goalkeepers, which is why I didn't pay the premium for Rudiger in the first place. I went with Christensen all those weeks ago. If I'm investing in defenders, I guess I want that upside, errantly or not. So I always look at I think I kind of sway more towards individual stats of the player rather than the team stats of the team for the majority of the time. That's for sure. Anthony, anything to add there?
Not hugely. I think maybe something that maybe is implicit in what we've been saying, but isn't something that any of us have actually explicitly stated, is that there has been a shift towards wingbacks in general in football in recent years, which means that, there are more and more options coming available who really push on in terms of FPL points. So gone are the days where really you kind of had, Baines, Coleman, Ivanovic or whoever as your few options. Now there is kind of, you've got your two wing backs at Liverpool, you've got your two wing backs at Chelsea, if not four, and you've got, one, two, three wing backs at City who could be pushing on depending. And so you've kind of got this plethora of options because that is just the tactical approach that's in vogue right now, which means that because these fullbacks are getting so far forward, they're as creative, they're so important in the team because of the space that they can get in the sides, they are now individually generating so much better stats that it's almost impossible to ignore them. And that's where we've finally come to this position where it seems like big at the back is crystallizing as the FPL tactic du jour in a way that it has been threatening to do so for quite a few years now. And so I think that's why we have started to move away from the kind of beautifully economical idea of your 4.5 who gets, 12, 13 clean sheets a season, the Connor Cody pick. I think that's why we've started to, move away from that bit by bit more than ever. Part of this too, though, is that just like you tend to have a cheap entry route into some of the top defenses every single year. And this means that, again, you just have, the top defenses tend to be the ones where those players with the amazing individual stats come from, but they're also the ones that have the good team stats. And so, last year it was Rudiger, for example, in the Chelsea defense. There have been cheap entries into the United defense in the past. There will be potentially a cheap entry into that Chelsea defense with Chalobah at some point as well this season. And so it just means that more and more you can just start to look to the individual details. So I think we have seen that shift overall. Naturally, the answer is, to answer Tom's question, both. But I think we have started to favor the individual more so than ever this year. And I suspect that will continue to be the case this season. Although, what we've been saying about big at the back being what seemed like the tactic that was going to stay has fallen apart before. It could happen again. But it just feels less and less likely with the way tactics are developing in football.
I'll tell you something that's helped me kind of really conceptualize in the first place to get over my fear of having loads of defenders. It was I kind of just thought, you know what? I'm not playing 4-4-2 or 4-5-1. I'm effectively playing 0-8-2 here because all of my defenders are actually midfielders, and they get more points for it. So don't think about defenders as being a negative thing. They're a positive thing. And that sort of just a little tweak in my mentality when I was thinking about defenders and buying them in. Like you said earlier on, Andy, I wouldn't buy a defender for a hit. In the case of someone like Reece James, you're not buying a defender. You know that. Even though the characterization is of that, the player himself isn't a defender. It's only a defender in name only, a Dino.
There is kind of something that maybe this gets us way further into the weeds and away from Tom's question, but I think this is something that is becoming maybe a bit of a kind of a farcical issue in FPL. So when you look at your team sheet as it's laid out on Sky or BBC or wherever, you're starting to see the wing backs be laid out as midfielders. And I guess that's the trick that you're playing on yourself, Tom, is something that we already see being played to us in how team sheets are portrayed before almost every single game. So in FPL now, what we're effectively doing is we're thinking of the defenders as midfielders, but in truth, the good midfielders are actually in truth forwards. And so we're kind of just, everything is kind of being pushed forwards. And so I think there is kind of a rationalization that needs to occur with the positions in FPL, because at this point, it's just becoming a little bit silly how, the good defenders are basically out of position defenders playing as midfielders, and the good midfielders are basically out of position midfielders who are playing as forwards. So this needs to be sorted, because what we're basically seeing is the Connor Cody's and the Raul Jimenez's of this world are tending to get squeezed. And this isn't really a good thing for the greater structure of FPL. And this is why we have such a template this season. And if that continues to play out, then it's going to be a bit of a problem. But anyway, we'll wrap up this correspondence section. Tom, who emailed in, Tom Campbell, he emailed whogottheassist@gmail.com. You too could have a question, poem, addendum, disagreement with everything I've just said. If featured on this podcast, if you too email in to whogottheassist@gmail.com, it would be very welcome.
Thank you very much. Bouncily presented as ever, Anthony. Bouncily. Let's move on to the questions this week. And the first kind of questions are about the short-term focus, all the congestion around this time of the year. Andy's favourite questions. He loves answering these. So we'll come to him in just a second. First question this week is from a Sideways at FPL if you're watching the YouTube. Just because I couldn't fit him in, basically, if I put him up to front and get a speech bubble into the mouth. It's very difficult to do. He says, the next 3 game weeks cover just 10 days. Is this the time to change up our team management process in order to not get left behind with the games coming thick and fast, or should it not make any difference? And FPL Banger, who stitches Andy up a little bit, takes a screenshot of one of his videos. He says, with the Christmas congestion, what is the consensus on strong benches? Or do we just put money into the 11? As Andy said, rotation is never, ever, ever, ever as bad as we think, right? Never. A very, very kind of regular question we get every single year. Andy, what's the kind of stock response that comes out of your mouth whenever you're asked this?
Wow, exactly what's on screen. I feel like usually it's an overplayed thing at Christmas. There is some rotation. It's very rare that 7 or 8 of your players miss out at once. Sometimes it's often quite hard to call as well, because the games really are like 2 or 3 days after the last one, and it's another 2 or 3 days to the next one. So it is pretty difficult to call. I don't think you need. I mean, you could change the strategy a bit because of all the money floating around this year for some people, but I mean, I think people overplay how much money needs to be on the bench. Most people don't have 3 non-playing players anyway. So if you've got like a Livramento, a Brownhill, and then maybe one other defender or a Josh King or whoever, that seems like enough to me. I don't know why we need to go and spend too much more money. I mean, it is worth noting that a bench isn't just about getting your players on when they miss out. It is also about having a bit of flexibility. So if a player misses a game through injury, like even a minor injury over Christmas, that could be 2 or 3 games, and your bench could cover if you've got someone a bit more decent. But for me, it's not something I'm really planning for. I'm just doing my transfers as normal. I've got Livramento, I've got Brownhill. It's not ideal. Would I like to have 5 or 6 or 7 million pounds on the bench? Yes, but it's not usually possible. So yeah, I don't think it's anything we need to worry too much. I don't think this Christmas period is any worse than any other one.
Yeah, in fact, probably better because, well, I don't know. Let's see what the COVID numbers are like, to say the C word.
Good point.
But hopefully better than last year, where you had players dropping out all the time. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I think Twitter loves a scaremonger. Social media loves a scaremonger. You know, visions of a horror scenario where you end up with kind of that season where only Man City had a game and we all captained Carlos Tevez.
Yeah, he scored as well, didn't
he? He did. I think he scored for a brace actually. But there are obviously, to take it down to real basics, a few obvious examples where rotation could be seen. A few categories: age, Ronaldo, Vardy. Will they play 90 times free? Probably not. So one to bear in mind. Injury risk wise, so Andy mentioned Lamptey. The likes of Antonio and Wilson perhaps will worry me with those hamstrings, and general susceptibility to rotation. Do you have Man City midfielder? You know what you've gotten into when it comes to this time of year. Don't be afraid, and if of rotation, you've got them there for a reason. And please don't moan if they do get rotated. You know the risks. I'm sure you don't have very much to offer here, Anthony. Anything perhaps about moving towards strengthening your bench? Like, when would you make that transfer? If you were, say, in a situation where you've got one decent bench player and perhaps a couple of duds, like at what point would you be thinking, right, okay, I'm going to start to make a transfer to strengthen my bench up a bit?
I think for me, most of us at this point are probably trying to hold squads that have at least 2 substitutes available, and there's no excuse for not having Alan as your 3rd sub. So I think with that in mind, like you should be kind of safe enough, I think, as Andy says, to withstand the rotation, and you'd be very, very unfortunate to be down to 10 men. And I think you might as well just plow on with that particular thought. I think maybe if you're in a position where you haven't gone heavily in on the fullbacks, who I think are quite likely to get rotated, maybe there's an argument in your head that you could try and just continue to abstain from the wing-back mania, but I think you'll just suffer more doing so. And so I think that's a difficult thing to try to build an argument for. We're just too far away from Christmas. And the other thing that I would say when it comes to just considerations and thing that we didn't mention is Afcon. And when players are going away on international duty, you may need to start managing your team and planning ahead, just because you're going to start running out of players when Afcon starts. I think an awful lot of people would have, a few players at least who are going away potentially to that. And so it's just a matter of planning. And of course, there is the very big name, Salah, going away to that we would especially need to be kind of keeping in mind. Outside of that, really, I think maybe just the Elf's question, which was more focusing on management, I think just try and actually keep managing. It just turns into a really, really busy time where it's really hard to just keep on top of, the individual details of particular game weeks. You spend a lot of time with family. You don't get to watch as many games. There's so many games on, and there's so many games one after the next that it can be hard to stay on top of things. And so you may have to adapt your management style to just maybe just work off less data than you usually do if you just don't have time to crunch through it. But this isn't a specific change. It's more just a necessity based on time, and I think everyone can get through that.
Cool. So don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. Everyone's got money at the moment. Everybody has
exactly.
Probably 2 players on their bench. Trying to
get Alan. Forget about Billy Gilmore. He's Newport. Doesn't matter.
Well, that's certainly a point of view, Anthony, but probably not one I'd endorse. Right. Unfortunately, fortunately, actually, we've actually picked up the Benny Blanco question this week, which was kind of to some extent, he says he's thinking of ditching Diaz to Chilwell. he and FPL Nordic asked about buying in Chelsea defenders. We've spoken about kind of that in inverted commas back four. I think the answer would probably be that to those questions, yeah, we'd probably be kind of saying, you know what, if you can do it fairly easily, do it. Andy, considering a -4 to get James in, so that answers Nordic's question. Region, Jono Forward mentioned him. I just to keep this brief, it was his first ever goal for Spurs. It's very early days. Ponterific 5.1. You could probably do worse for the price tag. You got a chance versus Everton as well, but nothing to really kind of make me think he's worth a transfer right now. Interesting one with you guys on, and we kind of did start to go down this rabbit hole earlier on. Is the next question on United's takes and kind of perhaps relatedly a link to the new manager bounce. So FPL Claret asks what our opinion on United is now and which assets we're tracking ahead of their fixture shift. And we've already kind of spoken about our cynicism about that. But relatedly too, we may see, if we do see this kind of bounce and reflecting the bounce we kind of were speaking about last week. I said bounce too many times. I even described you as bouncy earlier on without even thinking about it, Anthony. But Adam Pritchard asked if anything new manager bouncy made us reevaluate options over the weekend. That's a record amount of times I've said bounce in the space of about 2 minutes. Boing. Right. I think we've already expressed our cynicism on United to some extent. Should we maybe pivot more towards a new manager bounce that we saw this weekend, with decent results for Villa, Norwich, a draw obviously for Newcastle, a high scoring draw as well actually, and obviously the Spurs 2-1 victoire. What did we see anything in these sort of teams that gave us cause for positivity? Any players you've got our eyes on? Anything else that we'd note about these? Andy, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think I can cover this pretty quick from my own point. I think Norwich. Look, I think Pookie may be an option, but I think Alex McCarthy really helped them to get that win at the weekend. Like, he was poor for both goals. He probably should have saved both of them from Norwich. And I just don't. I think Dean, obviously a lot of Villa fans were sad to see Dean Smith go, but I think he's got a lot to do for that Norwich side. So I don't think they're suddenly going to become options. I think Newcastle I think Callum Wilson is just always going to be a pretty good option because he's nailed on penalties. I don't think Eddie Howe is necessarily going to change my thoughts too much, especially from the defensive side. I think the most interesting one for me is Gerard at Villa, because I think Villa defense has actually been pretty poor apart from Martinez's heroics. So maybe looking at their defenders, possibly Watkins. Let's see how he gets them playing. There was an interesting tweet from the Tactical Times on Twitter. Said that Villa were the 5th least active pressers in the Premier League before Gerard came in, and Brighton are the 5th most active. And Villa outpressed Brighton in that first game. Now that's just one game. Whether or not they can keep that up, who knows? Maybe it's just new manager bounce. They want to impress Gerard. I don't know. But there's a new way of playing, and that might help their defence. So possibly the Villa defence. But again, we've just done a whole podcast talking about all those wing backs that we all want to buy. I can't see a route right now where maybe we'd want to buy a Villa defender, but it's worth keeping an eye on. And I think Watkins, again, could be a player that comes into that forward bracket at some point soon, because Villa's fixtures do get pretty good soon. I think for the next few, they're pretty awful. Palace, Man City, Leicester, Liverpool. But from game week 17 onwards, they got Norwich, then they got Burnley, Leeds and Brentford in the space of 5 game weeks. So they are the team that I'm most interested in, I think, from a new manager perspective. The rest, I think we kind of know what we're going to get from Newcastle and Norwich anyway. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh on Eddie Howe, but yeah, I don't think player options are going to change too much.
3 goals conceded. Interesting point about the pressing. Gerard will probably be urging them not to let that record slip. I mean, there's not too much there, is there? As you said, Wilson 6 shots, 2 on target, 1 big chance missed, unlucky basically. St Maximin was a bit of a live wire. I think Gilmore, probably the new Alan, 4.4, perfect enabler. I think it was 3 chances created, and he got an assist, admittedly from a corner. Villa, as you say, I mean, Matthias Kowalski, otherwise known as Matt Cash, could come into play at some point if he does kind of do that kind of rampaging wing-back sort of role. It sounds like he's looking at Barnard Barisic, I think it was, who was the left-back at Rangers, to come in and replace Matty Target eventually. As you said, they've got fixtures that kind of lend themselves to watch and wait. They've got City and Liverpool lying in wait over the next 4. hashtag narrative, Gerard going back to Liverpool. But it all kind of lends itself to a bit of a wait and see. I guess Spurs is probably the other one that's worth mentioning, just because it's a newish bounce. Maybe you could even throw Watford in here and say, "Oh, that's kind of a newish bounce." I think the jury's still out on them too. I'm concerned a little bit about Son actually. I didn't sign him. I did go for Kane, but I felt like just watching the game that he was a bit lost in the system yesterday. I think there was a couple of surging runs where it didn't really go anywhere, and I genuinely, apart from those moments, can't tell you very much about his performance just from my memory. In terms of the data, it wasn't particularly good either. So those would be my only observations. I think it is kind of a watch and wait really there. And obviously listen to our friends Planet FPL for the in-depth look at Son, he's probably going to destroy me, isn't he? But Anthony, what about you? What did you think about these guys?
I think Andy has probably highlighted the right team of the kind of immediate teams that have just had new managers, that being Villa. Number one, they obviously had a decent defensive record last season, and they're just regular defenders were options last season as well as Emi Martinez. And with someone like Martinez in their team, you can kind of hope that those defenders might start to prove value. You can get cheap enough access into that defense, so it's worth watching. But as you say, it's real, wait and see. It's in the midfielders and the forwards, and especially, I guess, the forwards, given the lack of options that we've discussed. Like both Watkins and Ings have been near enough essential in FPL at various times in the last 2 seasons, and it's just not impossible to see that coming around again. So I'd be watching both of them with interest to see how things develop for them, and then have a very kind of casual lazy eye on the likes of McGinn, Buendia, even Ramsey as an enabler, or Leon Bailey if he just obviously came off the bench at the weekend. But it would be kind of interesting to see him play more.
Shout, yeah.
But this is like one of these, like, we've not really seen him do a huge amount. He's obviously had a few like decent short performances, but we just don't know where that's going to go. So it's with Villa is just wait and see. Spurs, personally, I wouldn't have much of an interest in their defense as it stands from what I've seen, really. But what I would say is that I would just be hopeful for Son. Not for any good reason, really, other than he seems to have been able to defy statistics in the past. And he was, even in terms of just point scoring this season, he had done quite well, up until the point that they moved on their manager. And so I'd be just hopeful that if you were Conte, you'd be trying to figure out a way to accommodate him and to get him scoring, especially if Kane looks as leggy and lost and everything else that you could say at the moment. And so with that in mind, now that he's in my side, I'm happy to construct a narrative to keep him in there. But at the same time, I can totally see how someone who doesn't own him wouldn't be thinking he's a priority buy. Yeah. I think you've probably got things that you'd want to do more. You mentioned Norwich there, so Tom, I'll just toss them in and just say it does seem like there's forward options there, given the lack of forward options. So you might as well just consider them.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I did tweet. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, so there's been so many new managers. I completely forgot that Watford and Spurs have only just changed their manager, because it was like 2 weeks ago. So there's been like 5 different managers since then. The only thing I would say, like kind of just observational, really, is at the end of the game when Spurs won, the way Conte went round that team, like just like I don't know how he didn't injure some of the players. The way he was kind of like shaking their hands. But like, for anyone that thought that Kane was down in tools and just wasn't injured, he had this big smile on his face when Conte came over to him. Like, I think Spurs will be fine, but I think like, I'm on Kane as well, so I'm hoping he comes good. But I think the style is so different. It's a lot to learn, like, straight away. And I think in the first half, I think Conte came out of an interview saying it was him that kind of gave up possession to Leeds. I think he said that's what they wanted to do in the first half, but they were poor. And then the second half, they kind of turned it around. So there is a lot to learn in how he wants to play. So I don't know how quickly they're going to like nail it, how good they're going to become options quickly. Like Reguilon is someone that interests me, but I'm not going to probably rush out to buy him. But I think Spurs probably are the most interesting. I just forgot that they just changed their boss.
Fair play. I mean, it's six already this season. There were only 4 last year, for context. But yeah, no, absolutely. Right. Final question of this game week takes us nicely into transfers and captains, of course. A differential discussion. So a good friend of mine, FPL Jack, was out drinking with him on Saturday. And wow, he can really pack a punch. Asks, do we prefer to go, are we over-focusing on differentials? He kind of looking at this, he says, is there too much focus with going too differential too early in general? How can focus managers make up ground quickly? Or is a patient / slow and steady approach often better? No wonder what rank you are after game week 12. Quite an interesting question, actually, because obviously there are a lot of kind of ultra differentials being thrown around as well as little ones. I guess in the context of the Salah EO vacuum, your team matters more than ever in terms of how you generate gains. Don't think there's much harm in seeking out those ultra differentials personally if you've got the bases covered. So last week, I bought Conor Gallagher, and I thought I could balance that out, with an uber differential in Gundogan. Those things, if you have players with lower ownership, those do ultimately get you higher quicker, provided they outscore the alternatives you had considered. It didn't happen for me this week, but if I'd bought Bernardo or if I'd bought Corday, I'd be speaking a very different tale right now. Or if I bought Jota, I'd be speaking a very different tale though too. It can often be kind of over-egged, can't it? That always a differential is probably, you shouldn't overlook like a really obvious choice for a differential. But sometimes, especially in this particular context, I think it does become slightly more urgent just because the captain, normally the way in which you can differentiate from people is completely knocked out as an option here. So getting players in low ownership who you do think are about to go on a run or can kind of support you over a 2 or 3 week period, I don't think there's much wrong with that. What do you guys reckon?
Yeah, so for me, in some ways, I think because of Salah captain being so heavily captain every year, I feel like there's less reason to go differential because you're going to get points from every other player for once. Like it feels like we never, especially early on, when Antonio was being captain and Salah and Ronaldo and Lukaku, you had players in your team you didn't want points from, and it's a little bit different now. So actually, in some ways, I quite like it. Although it is nice getting a bit of a differential captain every now and again. I think this is one of the biggest myths in FPL, that you need differentials. I think Seb Bassel posted about it on Twitter recently. Usually, if you've got like Reece James, for example, I don't care what his ownership is, I want him. Diogo Jota, I don't care what his ownership is. He could be 80% owned. I would still want him because I think he's such good value as an option. I think your reason to buy a player should never say never, because I think there are circumstances when you can look at it, but it should never be their percentage ownership. Like, to give an example of when I would look at it, last day of the season last year, I didn't go through with it because it's kind of boring manager I am, but I had Salah and I knew that Mane was lower owned, and so forth, he's a bigger differential. Any given week, I'm always going to captain Salah over Mane. But at the end of the season, when you want to get that final hit to try and get into that ranked tier above or whatever it might be, maybe to beat a friend, then I'd possibly look at it. But after game week 12, no chance. No chance for me. I don't know if you think different, Anthony.
No, I don't think differently, but that's having had a few differentials just burn me so badly this season that I find it very hard to start talking about differentials in a positive light. I had a fairly early wild card. I had a good first 2 game weeks of the season and then pulled the wild card to get ahead of the fixture shifts, and genuinely still haven't recovered. And I can't help when I see Jack's question, but just think of that particular problem. And I do think, as you say, if you can get on the template early and just keep taking the marginal gains, that is largely how you succeed in FPL. It's not, very few people are able to pull off what Late Riser has pulled off in the past with, upside chasing and taking on these kind of, punty differentials that explode to life. Like, I think the explosive differential that you could be looking to at the moment isn't necessarily some low percentage owned player, although there are probably a few out there. It's probably actually swerving on the Salah captaincy, but that would be incredibly brave to do right now.
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, I think, Jack, yes, we do overfocus on differentials, but I do think that there's a slight bit of an FPL content industry triangle paradox here, that you have to start talking about the other options in a given week. And so I think, your Twitter, your content, your podcast, whatever it might be, tend to be talking about those other options. But usually implicitly in there, it's like, here we are. We're about to probably start. We are definitely going to start talking about our transfers and captains. And I will probably wax lyrical about some other captaincy idea that I might have. But at the end of the day, I probably just won't do it, and I'll go with Salah because I will be punished if I don't do it. But that is because, as Andy said, I'm just picking the one who I think is going to get the points, as opposed to getting the one that everyone don't. Although in truth, I'm definitely thinking, oh my
Shock
God.
horror.
I'm also definitely just going, oh, the EO is so high, I will just die if it goes wrong. I'll be a 2 million rank if Salah explodes and I don't cap him. So,
Yeah.
To give just a little bit of context as well, like for obviously it didn't go very well, but in game week 12 at my rank, Kane was 42 point. It's too small. I think it's 66% owned or effective ownership. Like to me, that is a huge differential. Someone like Kane only 42% owned. That's massive, right? I think the problem with differentials, everyone's looking for that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. Like you get someone like Kane, maybe not Salah at the moment, but whoever, maybe Antonio gets sold in droves over the next few weeks, and suddenly he's got Norwich. He's only 40% owned. That's massive. That's a huge differential. Like you don't often get opportunities to get like huge point swings from those kind of players. If Kane had braced at Leeds, ownership would have gone up, and suddenly the amount of points you get goes lower. So I think the number people are looking for, like Chilwell, is 44% owned. That seems pretty low to me for what he can deliver. 44% effective ownership. Okay. So yeah, I don't think we need to look for these ultra differences. They're nice when they pay off, but I feel like some people get into like a cycle of chasing them. So it doesn't work. Well, I chase the next differential, and then suddenly you're miles behind.
I was literally just about to mention that. I think that it depends very much on your risk profile, and it very much depends on the sort of person you are. Like for me, it's like chasing the dragon. Like I just love like when that kind of ultra differential pays off. The problem is, as you say, it can mean that you've tied up a transfer or two because you haven't bought the obvious option, and in 2 weeks' time, you're probably going to have to go, all right, Gundogan, goodbye. I'm buying Jota now because I've got to. It is nice though. It's really nice when it pays off. It's nice when you get that moment. I think that's kind of what I like a lot about FPL. Plus the hashtag narrative these days and the hashtag content too can be nice, obviously. But yeah, I mean, let's move on to transfers and captains on that note, just to see if we are buying Uber differentials. What are we up to? Andy, teamers up front, looking quite solid. Are you looking at making any moves? Have you made any moves yet?
I haven't. Honestly, I think I have to roll. I think I have to go with that Reece James one more week. I talked about that -4, and a lot of people will say it's the right move, but selling Antonio for a hit to get Reece James before he plays Man United, I know I've got to get that out of my head because Man United are not the team they were, at least not at the moment. And obviously, Chelsea could absolutely get a clean sheet, and James could absolutely get attacking returns with no Maguire, no Varane in that team, but my gut is a -4 for Reece James this week doesn't sit right when I can do it for free next week. So I'm not really planning any moves. The only one that kind of is in my head, again, it's one of the, a bit like you said, I'm going to talk about it and then not do it, is Foden to Jota. Because Foden, it's a little bit of outcome bias because I bought him in, he's got 3 blanks in a row. But I just think Jota is one of the best value players in the game when he's nailed, and Southampton and like Liverpool are they feel like a step above everyone, even Man City to a certain extent, because you know who's going to get the points for Liverpool, and Jota's definitely going to be involved. But I just think any move that involves selling Jimenez or Saka this week when they've got Norwich and Newcastle, like they're not, Saka in particular has not been great. Like Smith Rowe's outscored him since I bought him in. But it just feels like I've got to forget about all that and then realise he's playing Newcastle at home this week and then look to get rid of him next week. So I'm going to hope that Man United can score a goal this week. That is my hope. And I'm probably going to bank and captain Salah because, come on.
Yeah, you've got to, really. All right, Anthony, what about you?
So I think I'm in a similar position to Andy in that I'm kind of hoping that Mr. Inevitable strikes for Man United and that just wipes out those Chelsea clean sheets and I have to survive a further week without a second Chelsea defender of any description to pair with Rudiger. So right now what I'm looking at is playing Guaita in goal because I don't actually have a second goalkeeper effectively. I suspect I'll play 4 defenders this week. I'll leave Livramento on the bench and have Cancelo, Rudiger, White and Trent Alexander-Arnold. In midfield right now, how I have myself set up is I have Saka, a bit like Andy. This just isn't the week to sell him in spite of the fact that my finger is very much on the trigger because like Andy, since I bought him in, ESR has outscored him and nearly matched him in value at this point as well. Such has been the popularity of him as a transfer in, and it's very frustrating. But I suspect with Newcastle at home, he will get another week. The Rafinha situation is kind of something that I'm monitoring. Just if that illness drags into a second week, I might just find an excuse to just can him. But overall, I feel like I do have decent options on the bench between Antonio and Livramento that I can absorb another benching, and maybe then I'd be just benefit more from the 2 free transfers. I have Salah, who I'll captain. Son will obviously play. Tony and Gabriel Jesus will both play as well. Hoping that Jesus actually starts the coming weekend at home to West Ham. I really thought he'd even come off the bench at the weekend. I was really, really surprised that he didn't, and kind of would have backed him to get something coming off the bench. But he did not, and I'll give Tony another week just purely because Everton haven't really been much great chicks lately. And I think I'd kind of hope that he might find his way onto the score sheet there. Whilst Brentford have looked poor recently, they did have a decent turnaround in an attacking sense in the game at the weekend against Brentford. And I think Brentford did that as much as anything because they've just got such a good coach there in Frank, and that I think maybe that might continue to pay dividend for them in the coming weeks, that the time he had over the international break to work with them may just mean that Tony's supply line kind of improves again. He just gets more chances. And like many strikers, one can often lead to another. And I just hope that that does prove to be the case for him.
Fair play. I mean, maybe the floodgates have opened after that lucky.
I don't think it'll be floodgates. I think it's more just like the
trickle gates.
Yeah. The shower has started to leak again. Drip, drip, drip.
They switched formation as well, didn't they? I think Tony, instead of playing with the 2, they played with Tony through the middle on his own. So maybe that will help. I still think for the price, Tony's probably the best forward still. Although I say that quietly because everyone always
Josh King.
Yeah, I know.
It's Josh King season, Andy. Josh King. Sorry, I've Hindi monkey took over me for a second there. Anyway, we're all in the same boat, basically, coming to my team. For Andy, buying in Reece James in 2 weeks. Read me looking to buy in Chilwell in 2 weeks. For Andy being tempted by Foden to Jota. Read me looking at Gundo to Jota, depending on if he's injured or not, Jota that is. But rolling, I think, for me is 90% definite. Unless there's a serious sort of issue that comes up this week. I, like Anthony, have Rafinha. I'm kind of keeping a watch on. And the only question for me in my passe 3-4-3 this week is if Dennis keeps his starting berth or whether Mbeumo starts over him. As you said, the formation changed, so I'm slightly less
You're not playing Cody away to Norwich?
No, I'm not, because no, I'm not doing that. It's he's a bench sub. That's all that's what he's there for, Anthony. I'd always play the attacking player. Basically, it's between.
What about Mbeumo over Antonio?
What if the ball goes in off the post or goes in off the post off Jordan Pickford? Hits the post, hits Pickford, goes in.
I don't know what the relevance of this is. Is this like
Kyle,
I feel like this is Kyle Walker being asked about
about the wrong I just feel like Mbeumo just has to score by just getting the ball off the post and then hitting Pickford. It's just like I feel like with Calamity Pickford, it might actually happen in a way that it just wouldn't happen with anyone else. I just feel like luck doesn't favour that man.
Yeah, so. I think the moment I bench him is the moment he goes nuclear. So I don't know. I don't know this week. I mean, I think I'm going to try to content my mental space that no one be thinking about a transfer with who do I bench. Like that's how sad my brain is. That's what I'm going to be thinking about this week, just to kind of give myself a bit of methadone to the stronger drug of thinking about a transfer. Right, I think we are complete. Anthony?
Yes, indeed. We are indeed. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. We were Who Got the Assist. If you want to get something into the correspondence, you should send an email to whogottheassist@gmail.com, or indeed you can get us with a Twitter DM or WhatsApp or whatever is the way that you have access to us. YouTube, if you want to watch us instead of listen to us, you can just search WGTA or Who Got the Assist on YouTube and you will find the videos, which are a slightly longer form than the podcast, as the podcast goes through an editing process, whereas the YouTube video is pretty much just raw as it was. If you want to join the mini league, 2IP43T is the code that you need. And Andy, thank you so much for joining us. You'll find Andy at Let's Talk _FPL.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, for coming on. Finally got you on after all these years. Let's not wait 5 years to the next time. Anyway, just a quick kind of thing as well. A very cut down, or maybe even no show next weekend. Unfortunately, I'm in Manchester visiting my sister. Nick's away, so he can't cover, and Anthony may be away as well. Probably no YouTube, or almost definitely no YouTube. A stripped down version of the pod with a monologue, maybe what you'll get. I'll keep you informed with a voice note anyway. Sorry, it can happen at times. Normally, we have people on standby all over the place, but just this one time, it just seems like the three of us are all incapacitated at once. But there you go. In the meantime, hope to assist you think about strikers and how absolutely terrible they are. Hopefully, there will be a resurgence up front next game week. Good luck game week 13 and speak to you, if not next week, very, very soon. Goodbye.
Oh.